بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. We mentioned one or two incidents that took place either somewhere near Istanbul or on the way in one of the expeditions to conquer Istanbul, in which Abu Ayyub Ansari Radhi-Allahu anhu narrated a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explaining about the meaning of the ayah وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. We explained that in great detail. There's another incident that we're going to talk about today in the same journey or maybe another expedition, because according to the riwayat, Abu Ayyub Ansari radhiyallahu anhu didn't take part in only one expedition but many expeditions on the way to Anatolia. So this may have taken place on one journey, and the incident that we're going to narrate today may have taken place on another one, or they most is possible they both took place on the same journey. In any case, they were far away from home. Abu Ayyub Ansari radhiyallahu anhu was in foreign land, an enemy land, when this incident took place. So it's narrated by a tabi'i. A tabi'i means those people who've sat in the suhbah of the Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majma'in. And he narrates a hadith to a group of Sahaba by another Sahabi whose name is Itban bin Malik radiyallahu anhu. So Itban bin Malik has one very famous hadith that I believe is in Sahih Bukhari as well. And he narrated that hadith to this tabi'i as well. And this tabi'i was narrating it to a group of people. Amongst them was Abu Ayyub Ansari radiyallahu anhu. What is the hadith? So Itban bin Malik says, I came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam once, and Itban bin Malik radiyallahu anhu had very weak eyesight. He was darirul basar, couldn't see very well. And at the same time, he was the imam of his masjid. Now, he didn't live too far away from the masjid, but the problem was that when on the way to the masjid, there was a small riverbed where the water would flow when there would be a lot of rain. There'd be like a flash flood. So it'd go through that riverbed and it would prevent him from going to the masjid. In addition to the fact that he couldn't see very well. So for a person who could see very well, he could easily cover that. But for him, since he was weak in eyesight, there was a possibility of him slipping, falling, hurting himself. So he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, "Qad ankartu basari." I can't see very well. وَإِنَّ السَّيُولُ تَحُولُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنِ مَسْجِدِ قَوْمِي. He said, I can go to my masjid. Problem is that there's this wadi or a riverbed between me and my masjid. And sometimes when it starts flooding, the water goes in between and there's a chance of me getting hurt. I would like if you could come and pray salah in my house in place of me going to the masjid. In other words, he wanted to establish a masjid in his home where he could pray on those days when he could not make it to the masjid. So, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Afa'alu insha'Allah." I will definitely do it insha'Allah. In other words, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is agreeing that his excuse is valid. It's a valid excuse, and therefore, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was willing to go and kind of open his masjid inside the house. Do like a ceremony of praying 2 rak'ahs, right? For barakah, for blessing. There's another narration related to this of another Sahabi who was also blind. Not nearly blind, completely blind. His name was Abdullah ibn Maktum radiyallahu anhu, and he was one of the mu'adhins of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina Munawwar. He also asked permission from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to pray salah at home, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not grant him permission. And so situations change from person to person. Nobody can take one hadith and say, this is what the hadith says about this, and I have a valid excuse, right? Because there may be another hadith out there with the same issue and that same excuse, and yet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam may not give that dispensation, that concession, right? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did give that dispensation to this Sahabi, Itban bin Malik. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever he used to go anywhere, it would always be with Abu Bakr Siddiq and Umar ibn Khattab. If not Umar ibn Khattab, Abu Bakr Siddiq was always with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on all his local trips in and around Medina Munawwara and also outside of Medina Munawwara. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to Abu Bakr Siddiq, and Abu Bakr Siddiq joined him, and they went, asked for permission, they entered, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as soon as he came into the house, the first thing he asked is, where do you want me to pray salah? Where do you want to make your masjid? I'll pray my salah there. So I pointed towards him where I wanted him to pray, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed 2 rak'ahs there, and then he says we made some food for Abu Bakr Siddiq and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we fed them. When people found out that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was at the house of Itban bin Malik. Where was the house of Itban bin Malik? It was right between Masjid Quba and Masjid al-Nabawi. Now, for those of us who've been to Medina Munawwara would know. For those of us who don't, this would be kind of a little bit of an incentive for us to go so we can find out where his house is. Itban bin Malik's house doesn't exist anymore. It was leveled when they were during development of, some making some homes. They leveled it out. But there's pictures of it still from the 50s and 60s of the house. It was a very small house, located very close to where Masjid al-Jum'ah is today. And as I said, that is between Masjid al-Quba and Masjid al-Nabawi. Anyhow, so this was far away from the city of Masjid al-Nabawi. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being here was a rare thing. And when people found out, everybody gathered at the house of Itban bin Malik. فَثَابُوا إِلَيْهِ. The word uses they actually jumped, meaning they just ran. They heard, they ran and came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the whole house was full. So one of the men said, where is Malik ibn Dukhshun? He was one of the Sahaba who was from that area, from that neighborhood where Itban bin Malik Radhi-Allahu anhu lived. Everybody was there who was amongst the Sahaba, but this Sahabi was not there. So now, one man said, إِنَّ ذَلِكَ الرَّجُلَ لَمُنَافِقٌ لَا يَحِبُّ اللَّهَ وَلَا رَسُولَهُ. This man was a munafiq. I know he's a munafiq. He doesn't love Allah and His Rasul. So as you know, there were munafiqs that lived among the Sahaba. But there was no way of knowing who was a Sahabi and who was a munafiq. So how were they able to differentiate who was a Sahabi and who was a munafiq? In these type of occasions, if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is here, if there's a munafiq, you couldn't care less. So he would never come to visit. But if it's a Sahabi, at the first opportunity, he would be there. So the fact that Malik ibn Dukhshan was not there was a big question mark. That, okay, that means he doesn't have iman. Right? Being in the company of pious people is a sign of iman. Being in the company of sadiqeen is a sign of iman. People who stay away from the masajid, people who stay away from the awliya of Allah, people who are close to Allah, that's a sign of nifaq. In the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was considered the mark of nifaq, of hypocrisy. Right? Anyhow, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to them, "La taquluhu." Don't say that. Don't say that. Because nobody really knows what's in the heart. The reality was he wasn't a munafiq. But he did have this habit that he used to spend time with the munafiqeen, sit in their company. So because of that, people from his neighborhood, even including his own family members, were very suspicious of his reality, who he really was. Was he a Sahabi or not? And so now this gave them that kind of opening to vent their feelings about him in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if they were wrong, Rasulullah ﷺ received wahi, he would be the first one to either expose him and confirm their suspicions, or the other way around, to reject and say, no, this is not what the situation is. And that's what he's doing here. He's telling them that لا تقولوا وهو يقول لا إله إلا الله يبتغي بذلك وجه الله. He says لا إله إلا الله. Okay? Now, every Muslim can say La ilaha illallah and still be a munafiq inside, because saying La ilaha illallah is not difficult. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam added one more phrase to the statement. He says La ilaha illallah and he's doing it with the intention to please Allah. This is only something that a Rasul of Allah could tell, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has informed him of what is real, what his heart really contains, and where his heart really is at. So now it was confirmed to the Sahaba. He says, La ilaha illallah. They said, Ya Rasulullah, amma nahnu fanara wajha wa haditha fil munafiqeen. Now, they're saying, Ya Rasulullah, we find that hard. They're not saying that, Ya Rasulullah, what you're saying is wrong, na'udhu billah. If Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is saying that he says La ilaha illallah and he's doing it with the intention to please Allah, no doubt he's a believer. They're not questioning that. But what they are asking is, Ya Rasulullah, then it doesn't make sense. Why does he sit amongst the munafiqeen so much? That's not a good thing. This is something very objectionable. So they said, Ya Rasulullah, ma nahnu fanara wajha wa haditha fil munafiqeen. He talks about them, he talks to them, he sits with them, and when he talks about them, he speaks to them very positively, in a good way. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, أيضا لا تقولوا, don't say this either. Don't even say that. That he sits with the munafiqeen, he has the face of a munafiq, and don't say that either. وهو يقول لا إله إلا الله يبتغي بذلك وجه الله. He says La ilaha illallah and he's doing it with the intention to please Allah. In other words, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reconfirming his point, reinforcing the point that he is doing it for the sake of Allah. He is a true believer. So whatever you're seeing, it may be what it is, but that's not his reality. That's not his reality. But here's for us to understand. We should never put ourselves in a place where people can become suspicious of us, doubtful of our iman and our deen and our taqwa. Right? If you're hanging around or sitting in the company or spending more of your time with people who are enemies of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that gives opportunity for people, even with the purest intentions and who are extremely positive, to question where you're really at. Yes, everybody should mind their own business and nobody should make judgments about others, but you can't help but sometimes. It's just the nature of things. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam recognized that. So, you know that when the Kaaba was rebuilt before the prophethood by Quraysh, they did not build it in the same blueprint that it was made by Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, because they didn't have enough money to make it complete. So what did they do? They left it incomplete and they just made a wall, which is now known as hatim, on the outside, like a semicircular wall on the outside. And the question that came up is, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam now had complete power over Jaziratul Arab. Now he could bring it back to its original state, the way it was made by Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. But what does he say to Aisha Siddiqa Radhi-Allahu ta'ala anha? He says that I don't want to remake the Kaaba according to the way it was built by Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. Why? Because I don't want people to say that he's trying to what? He destroyed the Kaaba and he's trying to do things his own way. That he's turning against Quraysh. Right? In other words, even though he had every right to do it, but the fact is that people would make judgments. And that judgment would be dangerous for people because they would be making that judgment against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it would put their iman in danger. Why should I do something that is unnecessary and put people in a bad position, in a bad situation? Right? Anyhow, there's a story about Hadhrat Thanvi rahmatullahi. I don't remember the whole story, but I'll tell you the gist of it. He was sitting in front of someone on a train that some person was a believer, was a Muslim, but he was doing something very wrong, completely against the deen. So Hadhrat Thanvi rahmatullahi, he said to him, you shouldn't do it like this is wrong. So that man, he said something very disrespectful towards Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Hadhrat Thanvi rahmatullahi was completely quiet. And he says that in my heart I was thinking, this is all my fault. I should have known who I was talking to and seen his situation. Will he be able to take what I'm going to give to him? Or is he not going to be able to swallow it, and it may turn him against Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He may utter the words of kufr that will turn him away from the deen. I should have showed some more his wisdom and hikmah in this regard. It's my fault. First, you have to establish a relationship with a person, and then you slowly bring them in. If there's no relationship there, then why would they care what you have to say? There's one brother came to me a long time ago. And so, this is the Parker Street Masjid. So, he was a convert Muslim, so he was, mashallah, really into the deen. So, he saw the Imam leading the salah with his pants below his ankles. Okay? So, he's coming to me complaining about what happened. He said, after he prayed the salah, I turned to him and I said that, you know what? You prayed with your pants below your ankles, and this is a sign of arrogance and the sign of people like Fir'aun. And therefore, I'm going to pray my salah again, and I recommend everybody else pray their salah again too. So that Imam obviously was embarrassed and then also very angry because he felt ridiculed. And then he's objecting that nobody else is saying anything, only me. Like, what's wrong with people? When you see something wrong, say it. And then he narrated the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's that hadith? That when you see something wrong, if you can correct it with your hand, correct it with your hand. If you can't correct it with your hand, correct it with your tongue. Can't correct it with your tongue, then correct it with your heart. وَذَلِكَ ضَعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. And that's the weakest sign of iman. Right? Which is absolutely true. But if you look at the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how many times did he use his hand when he could have? You think he could have used his hand against Abu Bakr Siddiq? Once, twice? Every single time if he wanted to. Or Umar ibn Khattab or other Sahaba, how many times did he use his hand? How many times did he use his tongue? In fact, the hadith mentioned that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't like something he saw, what would he do? Go straight up and say, why'd you do this? Or would he turn around, turn his face away? Right? Why? Because would that person be able to take it? If the Sahabi was able to take it, then he would correct him. Mu'adh Radhi-Allahu anhu, we talked about how he once prayed salah so long in Isha, and one person got up and left and he prayed on his own, and people said he's munafiq. He said, what? You call me munafiq? I prayed salah with you, you're praying all the way to Fajr time. I'm too tired, I got to wake up in the morning and do my work. And then you call me a munafiq. So he came and complained to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu called Mu'adh bin Jabal, and he says, Fattani ya Mu'adh, you're causing fitna? He could say that to Mu'adh because Mu'adh bin Jabal was very close to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was that relationship there. Right? So we have to be very careful with how we apply the ahadith in our life. And we need to understand that you can't apply a hadith without hikmah. And you can't gain hikmah without sitting with people of hikmah. You don't get hikmah from the sky that you just, meditate and suddenly it just comes upon you like a revelation. Right? Anyways, when this hadith was narrated by Mahmud, the tabi I was talking about, he says, فَحَدَّثْتُ بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثَ نَفَرًا فِيمَا أَبُو أَيُّوبَ الْأَنصَارِي. I narrated this hadith to a group of people, amongst them was Abu Ayyub Ansari. What does he say? Abu Ayyub Ansari Radhi-Allahu says, مَا أَظُنُّ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ قَالَ مَا قُلْتُ. I don't think Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said what you just said that he said. Which is the last few words of the hadith where he said, La ilaha illallah yabtaghi biha wajh Allah. He's saying La ilaha illallah and he tends to do nothing but please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He can't be a munafiq. I don't think he said that. So now, Mahmud, rahimahullah, was a little disturbed by this. So he said, I made a qasam. I swore by Allah. When I go back to Medina, he's in Turkey right now. When I go back to Medina, whenever I go back, I'm going to go straight to Itban bin Malik and tell him to narrate the hadith to me again so I can confirm what I heard from him before. فَرَجَعَتُ إِلَيْهِ, I came back to him. فَوَجَدْتُ شَيْخًا كَبِيرًا. Now he was very old. This is years later. فَقَدْ ذَهَبَ بَصُرُهُ. Now he is, before he could see somewhat, but he was weak-sighted. Now he couldn't see at all. Completely blind. وَهُوَ إِمَامُ قَوْمِي. And he still was the imam of his masjid. He said, I sat down next to him and I asked him about this hadith. فَحَدَّثَنِيهِ كَمَا حَدَّثَنِي أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. He narrated it exactly the same way he narrated it the first time, without any difference. Now, one of the narrators of this hadith, his name is Ma'mar. Ma'mar. He says when Imam Zuhri is the teacher of all your great mashayikh. From Imam Malik is his student, right? Imam Hanifa, rahimahullah, is his student. He has many, many great students, okay? He's not very well known now himself. His students are very well known. Imam Zuhri, when he used to narrate this hadith, he used to say, ثُمَّ, always, whenever he narrated this hadith, he always used to say, ثُمَّ نَزَلَتْ بَعْدُ فَرَائِضُ وَأُمُورٌ نَرَى أَنَّ الْأَمْرَ انْتَهَى إِلَيْهَا فَمَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ أَلَّا يَغْتَرَّ فَلَا يَغْتَرَّ. Then after this incident, many, many other things were revealed upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many more things were revealed, ayahs of Quran, ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said or did. Fara'id came, different ahkamat, commandments came, right? And the situation changed. So whoever has the ability to not be deceived by this hadith, please do not be deceived. Because if you look at the apparent meaning of the hadith, it seems like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that you can say La illallah even if you are sitting in the company of the worst people in the world. Munafiqeen were some of the worst people in the world. And he was hanging around with those people. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, no, he's saying the kalima, he's okay. In other words, say the kalima and then do whatever you want. That's the impression you get. So Imam Zuhri rahimahullah saying, but this hadith was related to the first years after the hijrah. After this, many commandments came down, many ayahs came down, situation changed. Now there's more things that are fard upon the ummah that they have to do. It's not just say the kalima and you're all good. Right? Then the ahkamat came that you have to sit with the sadiqeen. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullaha wa kunu ma'a sadiqeen. Right? So do not be deceived by this. This is exactly why Abu Ayyub Ansari Radhi-Allahu was not willing to accept this hadith. Does that mean he didn't believe in it? No. In fact, there's a hadith. This is one of his last wills that he made. What did he say at the time of death? These are his last words. Where did he die? Near Istanbul. What did he say? He says, when wafat, amma hadaratul wafat, when death came upon him, he said, Kuntu katamtu ankum shay'an. I used to always hide something from you. My whole life, I hid something from. He's talking to his students and people around him. I hid from you something I knew. And I heard it from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, Lawla annakum taznibun. If it wasn't for the fact that you would be sinners, la khalaq Allahu khalqan, Allah will create another creation. Yuznibun, they will commit sin. وَيَغْفِرُ لَهُمْ, and Allah will forgive them. What's the point? Why was he narrating this at the time of his death? Because he was scared that if he narrates this hadith, people will be thinking, let me sin and then make tawbah. People will start committing sins because they'll misunderstand the hadith. So it wasn't that the incident that took place and what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was something he did not believe in. He believed in it, but he didn't want it propagated. He didn't want to accept it. So he's telling Mahmud that I don't think Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this so that Mahmud doesn't fall into some type of deception because of the apparent meaning of the hadith. And we find this happening quite often with the Sahaba where they knew something but they wouldn't tell for fear of people being deceived by it. So for example, there's a hadith in Sunan al-Tirmidhi about Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. So people came to Ubay bin Ka'b and they said, when is Laylatul Qadr? And he said, 27th. There's no doubt about that. They said, we just went to Abdullah bin Mas'ud and he said it's throughout the year. He said, no. Abdullah bin Mas'ud knows just well. He knows very well, just as much as I do, that it's on the 27th. But he's not telling you because he doesn't want everybody to just sit and wait for 27th and lay back and take it easy for the rest of the month. That's why he's not telling you. In other words, Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, according to Ubay bin Ka'b, knew that it's on the 27th. According to his opinion, he was firm on that, but he would never ever tell anyone for fear that people would do tawakkul on that, you know what, let's just work out, and that's exactly what we do, don't we? 27th comes and everybody's in the masjid doing i'tikaf and all that, and then the whole night ibadah, and then the next day, 28th, is completely blank. Nobody's there in the masjid anymore. It's like there's no more tarawih or something. Ramadan has ended on the 28th. This is what Abdullah bin Mas'ud didn't want. So he wouldn't tell what he thought he knew or what his opinion was about something for fear that people would be deviated by it. So ilm can be good, but it could also be dangerous depending on who you're talking to. This is why Abu Ayyub Ansari never revealed this hadith until the very end, because he also had a responsibility to make sure he relates all the hadith that he ever heard from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this one he didn't want to narrate until the very end because he feared for the iman of the people. Right? What was his last will? Shahida Abu Ayyub ma'a Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam Badran. He was in Badr, and he never stayed behind in any ghazwa that Rasulullah sallallahu took part in, but he was there with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now this is the hadith that proves that Abu Ayyub Ansari didn't take part in one expedition but many expeditions. فَإِنَّ أُسْتُعْمِلَ عَلَى الْجَيْشِ رَجُلٌ شَامٍ فَقَعَدَ ذَلِكَ الْأَمْرِ. Every single year he would go out in an expedition. He's in his 70s and 80s by this time, by the way. 70s and 80s, and he's still going out on these expeditions on a horse. Not in your Land Cruiser, comfortable in the back seat. On a camel, horse, going in the desert. It was hard life. And he's in the 70s, 80s, but only with the intention to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These were the sacrifices that our Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majma'in made. So every single year, he would enlist in one expedition or another, and he would go. But one year, he didn't go. فَقَعَدَ ذَلِكَ الْأَمْرِ. That year, he refused. Why did he refuse? Because every single time he had an objection. Every single time the commander that was chosen for that specific expedition always happened to be a young person. He didn't like that. In other words, inexperienced, not having proper hikmah, maybe not having proper deen. They should choose somebody from amongst the elders. Maybe that's what he's thinking. I'm just guessing. But he wanted somebody who's more experienced and more person of taqwa. A person of taqwa. Right? فَجَعَلَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ يَتَلَهَّفُ. Then after that he would say, وَمَا عَلَيَّ مَنِ اسْتُعْمِلَ عَلَيَّ وَمَا عَلَيَّ مَنِ اسْتُعْمِلَ عَلَيَّ. Why do I care who's chosen as a commander over me? Right? First, the people that were, according to this riwayah, the person that was chosen as commander was rajulun shabun. Every single year, he would join the commander, this young guy, like in his 20s, early 20s. And you have people behind him in their 40s and 50s who are a lot more experienced. Many of them sahaba, many of them tabi'een. And here there's a young man being chosen. It's one of the signs before the Day of Judgment too. When deen will be the hands of your young ones. It's one of the bad signs of the Day of Judgment. The elders don't have the deen. It's in the hands of the young ones. But since the young ones don't have proper understanding of the deen, right? The deen gets corrupted. And the way the deen is being propagated and spread is also corrupted. And so instead of being a cause of guidance, they become a cause of misguidance. Because they don't have the experience, they don't have the hikmah. Right? Anyhow. So he refused. And then he said, why do I care? So anyways, next year, when the expedition was set out, it was Yazid ibn Muawiyah, the son of Amir Muawiyah Radhi-Allahu anhu. So when he was on his deathbed near Istanbul, فَدَخَلَ عَلَيْهِ, Yazid ibn Muawiyah came to him to visit him. He said, حَاجَتُك, you need anything? He said, I only have one haja, one need. إِذَا أَنَا مُتُّ, when I die, فَارْكَبْ بِي ثُمَّ اسْعَبِي فِي أَرْضِ الْعَدُوِّ. Take me to the land, the enemy, the closest part of enemy territory. As long as you can, for as far as you can go. فَإِذَا لَمْ تَجِدْ مَسَانًا, and if you can't go any further for fear of being attacked or anything, فَادْفَنِّي ثُمَّ ارْجِعْ, just bury me there and go back. So they buried him very close to the walls of Constantinople. I measured it, and I'm forgetting what the measurement was, but it's actually very, very close to the walls, what is known as the Theodosian wall. So there was a famous Byzantine emperor, Theodosius. So he built a wall around Constantinople. Constantine had also made walls, but they were a lot further in. He had made the city of Constantinople a lot bigger. So those were the walls that were there at the time. Those were like the city walls when Abu Ayyub Ansari came with his expedition. He was buried very close to that. Okay, so it is mentioned. There's one last thing I want to share with you. When they saw the Christians were looking over the walls, and of course they had their scouts around to see what's going on, and they noticed this movement and there's something happening, and they're burying him. So they asked, okay, إن الروم قالت للمسلمين في صبيحة دفنهم لأبي أيوب. When the Muslims buried Abu Ayyub Ansari, the Rum, meaning the Byzantine, asked the Muslims, what is this you are up to? I saw a lot of people gathering, and there was like burying him. فقالوا هذا رجل من أكابر أصحاب نبينا. This man who we just buried is one of the great people and the companion of our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وأقدم Islam, and one of the first to accept Islam. وقد دفناه, and we have just buried him. حتى رأيتم والله. And حيث رأيتم, and just as you see, we just buried him. And then they said, Wallah, we swear by Allah, لئن نبش, if you dig up his grave, لا ضرب لكم ناقوس أبدا في أرض العرب, will break down all your churches in Arab. There are Arabs, there are a lot of Arab Christians, Ghassan, Najran, they're going to wipe everything out, take a revenge on you for touching the grave of Abu Ayyub Ansari radhiyallahu anhu. So now, it's mentioned that the Christians thought, oh, this is one of the pious saints, right? So what they used to do is when they didn't have any rain, then they would go to the grave of Abu Ayyub Ansari and pray their own prayer, whatever they did, فَمَطْرُ, and the rain would fall. So it became their habit, like it became a tradition amongst the Byzantine until Muhammad Fatih came along and took over in 1453 and conquered the city. That whenever they had any problem, they go to Abu Ayyub Ansari's grave. This is according to this historical narration. Allah alam how correct it is. Obviously, it's not a hadith, so we don't know how accurate it is. But anyways, this is what it says. Shu'bah says, Sa'altul Hakam Ashahid Abu Ayyub Safin ma Achad. This is another incident altogether. But anyhow, the point is, Kashafu an qabri famataru. That whenever there would be no lack of rainfall and there would be a drought or anything, they would go to his grave and ask in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it would suddenly start raining. So they thought there was a lot of barakah there. Anyhow, this is the story of Abu Ayyub Ansari Radhi-Allahu ta'ala anhu. There's one more incident related to him, but we can inshallah keep that for next week. And then after that, we'll wrap up with Abu Ayyub Ansari. And inshallah, we'll start a new Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I don't know who, but I was thinking one great Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who is not amongst our shining stars yet, was a shining star, but not in our series, was Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu. So I think it would be a good idea to start with Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu next week, inshallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.